Hey guys, thanks for watching Precision Rifle Network. This is Joel. Today we're going to test and review the Burris XTR3, and this is the 5.5 to 30 by 56. Alright, so I have a guy that makes videos for me, Jason McBride. You'll see him a little bit later in this video. And he and I got together and we were just talking, and we're like, man, it really would be great to get more than one person's opinion on a given scope and kind of come up with some sort of a grading criteria. Now this is nothing new. Guys have been talking about this sort of a system on Sniper's Hide for quite some time. We came up with these criteria. So I'm going to be going through each of these 10 criteria and giving my grade on this scope, and then I'm going to give the scope to Jason and he's going to do the same thing. And we hope in that sense you'll be able to get a couple of different people's opinion based on what they're seeing with this optic, and it'll provide a more just accurate picture as to the quality of this optic.
Welcome back, everybody. Today headed out to my local range, Bench Wrestle Rifle Club of St. Louis. Going to be testing the Burris XTR3 5.5 to 30 by 56 rifle scope. We're going to be doing an independent or dual review, if you will, between Joel Wise and myself. Now, Joel and I have not shared each other's thoughts and opinions on this rifle scope, just to make sure that we don't try to influence one another.
So those grading criteria, we've got tracking, and that is a pass or fail score. We've got parallax. So this is going to be judged on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being bad, 10 being what we feel like is good. So that'll be everything from how low does it go, maybe it would be usable for 22 LR, kind of how forgiving it is, or do you have to be super fine detail and precise on it. 3, does it have a zero stop? Again, this is kind of a pass-fail. To some people this doesn't matter. To most people, they realize the benefit of having a zero stop on a scope, and so this is going to be a pass-fail. The weight of the scope, this is going to be a 1 to 10 scale. Again, this is a bit subjective in that a guy choosing this scope for hunting might want less weight, whereas a PRS type competitor might want to bump the weight of his overall rifle system up a little bit. So weight, it's a bit subjective. You're going to have to kind of take it, take it how it comes. So that again is a 1 to 10 scale. Reticle options. So this is going to be our opinion on the reticle in this optic on a 1 to 10 scale. 1, does it suck? 10, is it great? And why do we think that? First focal plane. So again, this is going to be a little bit of a personal preference, but we're going to talk about that. Each of us is going to talk about what it is and why we like it or dislike it. We're going to go glass quality. This is going to be a 1 to 10. This is how we view it. Now understand, I'm a photographer. I really know what good glass looks like. I also run a zero compromise optics on my competition gun. I don't know what Jason runs. So my opinion of this compared to what I've seen may not be the same, but that's where we want more than one person, right? We want somebody that maybe doesn't run a zero comp and isn't looking through high-end photography glass all the time. So that's a 1 to 10 scale. Price 1 to 10, again based on what we feel like the value is, or the quality or the worth of it. Magnification range, this is going to be a 1 to 10 scale. Again, a bit subjective. It might be a good thing to some people that this goes up to 30 times, whereas another guy might say, no man, that's pointless. I want mine to only go to 15 times. So you're going to have to kind of take some of these with a grain of salt. And then total elevation adjustment, this is going to be a 1 to 10 scale. Obviously, I mean, it should be kind of obvious, but 15 usable mils of elevation range is maybe considered worse than 30 usable mils of elevation range. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go ahead and do that test, that criteria for this scope. I'll post up the numbers for you and I'll tell you as we go along. Stay buckled, and this is going to be a slightly longer video. I wouldn't want you to get into a wreck about that, but we're going to get it busted out for you guys today. So first mine, then I'll give the scope to Jason. We'll go from there. All right, so the first thing with the testing criteria was tracking tests. Now, you're going to see some B-roll of me performing the tracking tests on this scope for a different video that I did, but this is the tracking for this particular scope, the Burris XTR3, and it tracked well from my 100-yard zero out to 1,000 yards, which is 8 mils of elevation adjustment. So I did not test it past that, but to me, it scored a pass.
Category 1, tracking. Tracking on the scope is perfect. My impacts were spot on using the dope from my FN 6.5 Creedmoor, and the scope returned to my 100-yard zero every time. I will refer to Joel on the finer details of this scope's tracking, since he has previously done a tracking test on the scope.
Alright guys, second criteria is parallax. I'm not sure if you can see that or not, but it parallaxes down to 20 yards. For a scope that goes all the way up to 30 times, I do feel like parallaxing down that far is pretty good. So it would still be usable if you wanted to for something like 22 long rifle, and then of course it parallaxes all the way up to infinity. I feel like that's pretty good. I think I'm going to give it a 8 on that.
Category 2, parallax. Parallax is excellent and goes from 20 yards to infinity. This will be very useful for anyone considering the scope in an NRL 22 or NRL 22X type application. I found the yardage indicators on the parallax nod to be very useful and accurate for the ranges that I tested it on. I rated this as a 10.
Alright, the third criteria is zero stop. This is a pass-fail. This scope, the XTR3, passes on that. It's got a zero stop feature, so you just turn it all the way down, and it locks firmly right at a hard zero. Alright guys, so the fourth criteria is weight. The Burris XTR2 comes in at 32 ounces. Now compare that with a scope that you know is heavy as crap, and that is the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 that comes in at like 48 ounces. So this is comfortably in the middle. It's not so lightweight that you feel like you're going to crush the thing. It's also, you know, not so heavy that it's going to be considered too heavy by many people. I'm not saying that the Razor Gen 2 does that. I'm just saying the Burris is comfortably in the middle. I personally tend to prefer a heavier scope. I do run a Razor HD Gen 2 on one of my rifles, and so the Burris is not necessarily bad or good in that sense, but I guess to me I'm going to vote it a little bit higher on the good side of things, so I'm going to give it a 7 on the weight rating.
Category 4, weight. At 32 ounces, I have no issues with the weight. When we compare to other similar scopes in this category and price range, such as the Vortex Razor Gen 2, which comes in at 48.5 ounces, the Night Force NX8 comes in at 28.6 ounces, and the Bushnell Elite comes in at 37 ounces, this scope falls right in the middle of the pack. In this category, I rated the weight as an 8.
Alright guys, so reticle options on the Burris XTR2. There are 3 different ones. There's one for the MOA version. There's a standard kind of crosshairs with hash marks for the standard mil version. And then they've got their, what's it called? SCR2 mil, which is what is in this scope. And it is very similar in appearance to you know, the Christmas tree style reticles that we're all used to. There's 2/10 hash marks everywhere, which I prefer over and above the half mil hash marks. It's very usable. It's not obtrusive in any way. In fact, it's incredibly thin, and I think they had to do that because in order for it to not be too thick up at the 30 times value, they had to make it a little bit thinner. So with my eyes, I'm 45 years old and my eyes are going bad and all these kinds of things. With my eyes, this reticle is too thin to be usable below 10 power for me. Unless I put my goggles, unless I put my glasses on and readjust the scope, at which point then I would be able to use it. This is a tough one, honestly. I actually like the reticle. It's very good for competition. It would be fine for hunting. It's a good, usable competition style Christmas tree reticle. Again, this is a 1 to 10 scale based on my personal likes and dislikes. Like, I had to turn the magnification up higher on this optic than I would normally on other optics in order to be able to see the reticle. So for me, that's a bit of a downside when I really want to run my optic somewhere in the 15 to 18 power range for competition. So I'm going to rate it a little bit lower based on that. I think I'm going to give it a 6.
Category 5, reticle options. Burris offers the XTR3 in 3 different reticle options: the SCR Mill, the SCR MOA, and SCR2 Mill. The reticles offered should fill the need of most shooters, but some may desire other offerings. Our scope was equipped with the SCR2 Mill, which is a Christmas tree design reticle. I found this reticle to be very usable and precise. The reticle is not cluttered and provides enough information needed for point of impact corrections and holdovers. The floating center cross is another nice feature. For this category, I rated the scope as an 8.
Alright, the next testing criteria is focal plane, first versus second. So again, this all comes down to my opinion. And I personally do not like second focal plane scopes. I've got my own reasons for that, but this is going to become a pass-fail for me, or if you're going to hold me to a 1 to 10 scale, I'm going to put it securely in the middle at 5. I am giving this a pass as far as being first focal plane. So it's a pass if you consider first focal plane as way better than second focal plane, and if you're going to hold me to the 1 to 10 scale, then I'm going to give it a 5. So hopefully that makes sense of why I did that, guys, but that's just the way I'm going to do that.
Category 6, focal plane. I do prefer a second focal plane scope for most hunting applications, but the intended market for the scope really is geared more towards a PRS or NRL type application, so I have no issues with the first focal plane as the only option. With this being said, I rated the focal plane of this scope as an 8.
Alright guys, so I just was looking through the scope and trying to determine what I thought about it for glass quality. Again, each individual person, but that's why I'm looking at it, Jason's looking at it. Hopefully we don't come up too awful different on the quality of the glass, and otherwise you'd have to kind of throw both of our opinions out. It'd be helpful to be able to have 10 people look at these things and come up with a more comprehensive number, but this is just the way we're doing it, guys. So for me, I just looked at the scope on max power at 100 yards to see what kind of detail I could resolve. And ultimately what you're looking at here is picking like 2 bullet holes down there at 100 yards on your target that are extremely close together but not touching. And through the scope on full magnification with it parallaxed correctly and focused to your eye, are you able to clearly make out the difference between those 2 bullet holes? Are you able to resolve that detail? The Burris was pretty good in that regard at 100 yards. And then if you stretch it out, let's say to 400 yards like I did, and I was looking at some shots on steel plate, even at 400 yards on 30 power, I'm still able to resolve the differences in hits, very clear detail around the edges of the steel plate down there. 500, still able, but things are starting to blur together a little bit at 500 yards with it. The edges aren't quite as clear and bright, and then at 600 yards, was definitely a noticeable chromatic aberration around the edge of the 600-yard plate, and it's a full-size IPSC out there. And then beyond that, the farthest that I can see at this range is about 750 to 800 yards. And if I tried to resolve detail of, say, leaves and branches on trees out there, in the direct sunlight, I'm able to see individual leaves, but I can't resolve the edges of the leaves. And definitely in the shadows, everything is just a massive, bunch of gray. So all those things taken into account. If you don't know what chromatic aberration is, it's kind of a discoloration and just look it up. I don't want to have to take more time out of your video to explain that, but it's not a good thing when it comes to optics. And this was already kicking in at about 600 yards. So my estimation is out of 1,000 yards, there's going to be a fairly significant amount of distortion, not being able to resolve the fine details that you would out of a higher end optic. This is still pretty good though. I mean, it's not bad. Compared to other scopes that I've looked through in the dollar range, like the Vortex Razor HD Gen 2, I would give the Razor slightly higher marks than this. And so I think I'm going to give this probably a 6.5 to a 7 on this scale for glass quality, guys.
Category 7, glass quality. Glass quality on the Burris XTR3 is very good. It has excellent contrast and is bright throughout most of the magnification range. The glass did begin to darken just a bit as I passed the 20x mark, but it was still very good even beyond that point. I was able to resolve details on a power line insulator at 1400 yards. There is a bit of chromatic aberration at longer distances, but this is virtually unnoticed at distances 800 yards and in. For the category of glass quality, I gave this scope a rating at an 8.
Alright guys, the next testing criteria is price. Again, this could be subjective based on your budget. For me, I run a zero compromise optics, so you can assume that my budget is kind of high, on the high end for optics. This optic comes in right around $2,000, and so I think based on just kind of the value that I'm seeing with glass quality and the turrets and all those things, I think this scope is probably priced a tiny bit too high. Comparing it to say a Leupold Mark V that you can get for right around $2,000, I would rate the Leupold Mark V higher in marks on a lot of these categories than this scope. So I would say this scope is priced a little bit too high. Like, this is a 1 to 10 scale in value to me. I think it should probably be in the $1,600 to $1,700 range for this optic. So I'm going to score it a little bit lower based on that. It's still not horrible for what you're getting though, so I think I'm going to give it probably a 6.5 on that.
Category 8, price. The MSRP of the scope with our reticle option is $2,219. It can be purchased directly from Burris for $1,941, and I did find it on Optics Planet for $1,749. Would I pay $1,749 for the scope? Not likely. I liked everything about this scope except for the size of the reticle, which I will discuss in just a moment. For the category of price, I rated the scope at a 6.
Alright, magnification range is the next thing, and I don't really know how. This is so subjective. One guy might like a 3 to 15 for everything from hunting to competition, you name it, that's all he uses. The next guy might think that the fact that this goes up to 30 times isn't quite enough. He wants the 7 to 35, Night Force or Leupold or something like that. I definitely don't think you need this much magnification range for competition, which is kind of my bent typically. You definitely would not need this magnification range for law enforcement if you were doing this as a job. Military, I can't say. I've never been there, so somebody else will have to come up with that opinion on their own. But you definitely wouldn't need this for law enforcement, and most competitors that I know run their optics in the 15 to 20, maybe 25 range. So this, to me, just has too much magnification. It's still usable, definitely, and it's nice for when you're zeroing at 100 yards and you just want to be able to see your impacts downrange. That's pretty good. This is really neither here nor there for me. I guess I'm going to rate it a little bit lower because I don't think it's necessary. I don't want to have to pay for something that I don't think I need. So this is going to get a 6.5 again.
Category 9, magnification range. I rarely use magnification beyond 15 power for any application except for shooting groups. The 30 power does work well for shooting groups, but I primarily run my scopes in the 12 to 15 power range, and I obviously need a usable reticle in those ranges. With the Burris XTR3, I found the reticle to be very thin at the 12 power range and was not able to begin using the reticle for my purposes until I reached the 15 power range and beyond. In the category of magnification range, I rated this scope at a 7.
All right, people. Last two things on the list are total elevation adjustment and then the turret feel. These are both 1 to 10 scale. So total elevation adjustment is 26 mils on the elevation turret, and I believe 16 mils on the windage. When you're dealing with mils, that's going to be plenty for just about everything you need. If you need more than that, get a 30 MOA base or a 40 MOA base. It's going to be plenty. I have no complaints with that. Obviously, there are other scopes with a lot more. You know, Zero Compromise comes to mind just because that's what I'm used to using. That has like 34 mils of usable elevation adjustment compared to, say, a 26. I don't feel like I can grade it more poorly based on that, at least not by much. So it's got a good usable elevation range for just about everything you'd want to do, hunting or competition wise. So I believe I'm going to give it an 8 on that. And then the turret feel, these are nice, kind of tactile, audible. They're not as crisp and clean and nice as some scopes, but they're definitely not bad. I'm going to give the turret feel a 7.5.
Category 10, total elevation adjustment. The Burris XTR3 has 26 mils of elevation and 16 mils of windage. The available adjustment will work for nearly any application as comparable to other similar scopes on the market, such as the Razor Gen 2, which has 28 mils of elevation and 10 mils of windage. The Nightforce NX8 has 26 mils of elevation and 20 mils of windage. And the Bushnell Elite has 30 mils of elevation and 20 mils of windage. In the category of total elevation adjustment, I rated the Burris XTR3 at an 8. Category 11, turret feel. Elevation is excellent. It is very tactile and audible. I really like the graduated scale between the whole numbers. The scale rises from 0.1 to 0.5 and then falls again as we dial up to the next whole number. I found this to be very useful for a quick reference to help ensure my adjustments are correct, especially when making fast adjustments. The windage turret did not have quite the same feel. It was a bit mushy and had a bit of lash, but it is still pretty good. Just not as good as the elevation turret. In the category of turret feel, I rated the Burris XTR3 at an 8. Okay, so here are my final thoughts. Overall, I am very impressed with this scope. Fit, function, and quality are very good. My biggest issue with this optic is the reticle. My overall rating of this scope would have been much higher if the reticle was more usable at the lower magnification settings. It may be worth noting that, yes, I am 48 years old and my eyes are a little bit worn, so this could have been a factor. Your experience may differ from mine.
All right, guys, thanks for watching today. Hopefully you appreciated that different way that we were doing the test, you know, giving it to two different people. Hopefully it gives you just a better, overall, more comprehensive rundown and picture of the quality of this scope. Obviously, you know, with these 10 or 11 different categories, man, there's so many. We could have added a lot more categories, but it was already a 20-some minute video. We could have made this thing an hour long if Jason and I had both done everything that we could have done to evaluate this optic. Just a couple of things as you're looking at this chart. Obviously, criteria is down the left. Each of us gave each different thing different points. Look at the notes on the side over there in 3 different spots. I put pass equals 10. That was where, you know, I gave a thing a pass, and Jason used a numeric scale, and we had to have a way to do that. So I just figured a pass is good, you know, versus a fail. So gave it 10 points just to make it somewhat even. And then you've got the total points down at the bottom. And then I also threw a grading scale in there. So you can see that difference there as well. So guys, thanks for watching today, and hopefully you'll come back and watch more videos.